What if a billion-dollar playground could empty overnight without a single explosion? No warning sirens, no headlines, just silence swallowing luxury as if it never existed. In the early hours, something shifted, not visible, not loud, but powerful enough to shake the foundations of wealth built on confidence, perception, and fragile global trust. Insurance alerts began flashing across private devices, numbers rising rapidly, risk models recalculating. What once felt secure suddenly carried uncertainty no money could immediately suppress or control. For the ultra-wealthy, yachts symbolized freedom, escape, status. But within hours, those same floating palaces became heavy financial burdens, draining hundreds of thousands silently. A single cost shift changed everything. Maintenance, docking, insurance, all rising together. A perfect storm where ownership stopped feeling like power and started resembling responsibility and risk. The transformation was brutal. Assets worth millions suddenly behaved like liabilities. Not because they lost form, but because they lost confidence, the invisible force behind their value. But here's the truth no one announces. Capital doesn't panic like people do. It doesn't scream or hesitate. It simply moves, quietly, efficiently, without leaving emotional traces. And when capital moves, everything built around it begins to hollow out. Services slow down. Activity fades. What remains looks intact, but feels strangely abandoned and disconnected. This wasn't triggered by destruction. No crisis visible to the naked eye. Just a synchronized withdrawal of belief. The most dangerous collapse because it cannot be physically seen. Dubai was always seen as a safe haven, a place where wealth could rest untouched, protected by stability, luxury, and the illusion of permanent demand. But safety built on perception can vanish faster than it was created. When doubt enters the system, even the strongest image begins to fracture from within. The marina still stands. The yachts still float. The skyline still shines. But something deeper has shifted. Something no architecture or branding can immediately repair or restore. So the question isn't what collapsed. The question is what was real to begin with. Was this stability or just a perfectly maintained illusion of control? At night, the marina told a different story. Engines whispered instead of roared. Lights moved slowly across water, like a silent evacuation no one publicly acknowledged. From above, tracking systems revealed patterns. Not random movement, but direction. Lines of wealth drifting away, like data points escaping a system losing stability and confidence fast. There were no announcements, no panic, just decisions made behind glass walls, the kind of exits only visible when it's already too late to react. The Mediterranean began receiving this quiet migration. European coasts, calmer waters, familiar legal systems. Money was not disappearing. It was simply choosing a new home. New Gulf projects also became magnets, fresh promises, new incentives, safer narratives. Capital doesn't stay loyal. It follows the environment that offers the least resistance and risk. This is how the elite operate. Not emotionally, not publicly. Survival always comes first. Loyalty is a luxury they cannot afford when billions are exposed. Within weeks, the shift became visible. Marinas once full of life started thinning out. Empty spaces appeared where symbols of wealth used to dominate every dock. Occupancy dropped sharply. Not gradually, but suddenly enough to feel unnatural. The absence wasn't just visual. It carried economic weight that began pulling everything down with it. Behind the scenes, another collapse unfolded. Crew members were released. Maintenance slowed. Supply chains fractured. The invisible workforce supporting luxury began disappearing without headlines. A yacht doesn't operate alone. It feeds an entire ecosystem. Fuel, food, staff, logistics. Remove the owner, and the entire structure begins to fall apart instantly. This is the domino effect of wealth. When billionaires leave, they don't just take money, they take movement, demand, and purpose from everything built around them. Money doesn't belong to places. It doesn't recognize borders or emotions. It flows where conditions are favorable, leaving behind spaces that once depended entirely on its presence. And those left behind feel it first. Workers, technicians, service staff, people whose lives were tied to a system they never controlled but depended on completely. While the elite sailed away under darkness, others stayed behind to face the silence. The contrast wasn't just economic, it was deeply human and impossible to ignore. What once defined prestige now stands motionless. Thousands of yachts sit idle, no longer symbols of power, but reminders of excess that lost purpose and direction. The silence feels unnatural. No engines, no celebrations, no movement. Just still water reflecting structures built for a lifestyle that suddenly stopped existing without warning. Ports that once symbolized ambition now resemble graveyards. Rows of expensive vessels lined up like abandoned artifacts, each carrying a story of halted wealth and retreat. Without constant maintenance, decay accelerates quickly. Saltwater, heat, and time begin their work, turning polished surfaces into corroded metal and faded luxury finishes. Paint begins to peel. Metal weakens. Systems fail quietly. What once required constant attention is now neglected, exposing how fragile luxury becomes when financial support disappears. Safety risks grow with every passing day. Loose structures, drifting vessels, and malfunctioning systems transform high-end marinas into unpredictable, potentially dangerous environments. Behind this visible decay, a financial pressure builds. Banks begin reassessing loans tied to assets that can no longer be sold, valued, or easily liquidated. Yachts were once considered reliable collateral. Now they are liabilities, illiquid, expensive, and unwanted, creating stress across financial systems that once depended on their value. The shock spreads outward. Waterfront properties lose appeal. A luxury apartment facing a lifeless marina no longer holds the same emotional or financial value for buyers. Real estate begins reacting. Prices soften. Demand weakens. What was once marketed as exclusive now feels uncertain, exposing how deeply everything was connected to perception. This is where the system reveals itself. Artificial luxury requires continuous flow, money, attention, maintenance. Remove that flow, and the entire structure begins to collapse silently. Dubai's model becomes visible under pressure. High leverage, rapid expansion, and reliance on perception created something powerful, but also incredibly sensitive to sudden shifts in confidence. The illusion wasn't the buildings. It was the belief that growth could continue endlessly without interruption, that luxury alone could sustain itself without deeper economic stability. Now the truth stands exposed. Luxury without sustainability doesn't last. It transforms into burden, expensive to maintain, difficult to exit, and impossible to ignore once abandoned. Step back, and the pattern becomes clear. The yacht crisis isn't the collapse itself. It's a signal, a surface crack revealing something much deeper underneath. Out in the distance lies a bigger story. The World Islands, once marketed as ultimate exclusivity, now stands as a quiet warning few want to discuss openly. Entire mega projects remain unfinished or underutilized. Billion-dollar visions reduced to sand and silence, showing how ambition without balance can slowly turn into long-term instability. This isn't just economic. Environmental pressure adds another layer. Altered coastlines, restricted water flow, and heat accelerate deterioration, quietly weakening foundations that once seemed permanent. When financial fragility meets environmental stress, systems become vulnerable. Not instantly, but gradually, until one day the pressure exceeds what perception and marketing can continue hiding. Investor confidence begins to shift, not collapse overnight, but erode slowly. Questions replace certainty, doubt replaces momentum, and capital starts searching for more stable ground. Reputation takes longer to build than to lose. Once cracks appear, they spread beyond numbers, affecting global perception, long-term trust, and the willingness to commit future investment. Dubai was once defined by ambition, by records, by scale, but narratives can change. A future city can quickly become a case study in excess and overextension. The shift isn't dramatic, it's subtle. Empty marinas, quiet islands, slower developments, small signals that, together, begin telling a very different long-term story. Looking ahead, the scenario becomes clearer. Spaces built for constant activity may remain underused. Projects designed for growth may struggle to maintain relevance over time. This is not about disappearance, it's about transformation. Every system reaches a point where it must adapt or face the consequences of what it was built upon. Because in the end, some truths remain unchanged. You can build islands, but you cannot manufacture trust once it begins to fade from perception and reality. You can attract money with opportunity and image, but you cannot force it to stay when conditions shift beyond what confidence and incentives can control anymore. So the real question isn't what's collapsing, it's what comes next. Reinvention or decline, evolution or exposure. The answer is still being written in silence. Is this the beginning of a new Dubai, stronger, more resilient, or the quiet end of an illusion that once convinced the world it could never break?